Get started. Okay, perfect. So it's 10:30, and that's what we had promised when the session will begin. So we will try to be right on time. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the official launch of the Green Thinker. And as a part of the official launch, we are having a series of conversations which kickstarted yesterday with a discussion on sustainable consumption and greenwashing. And today we are discussing a topic which is around a topic which is one of the most talked about in Singapore, food. So I will be your host as well as moderator today. My name is Mayur, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Green Collective Singapore, which is basically a collective of sustainable brands. And this topic is very, very special because uh, food is one of the biggest representation of our culture in Singapore, and that represents the multi-ethnicity, the different races, the different people who have actually come from different parts of the world and made Singapore their home over a period of last decade, not decade, centuries actually. And that is where the food culture intermix is really, really amazing to see in Singapore. However, there is another side to food, which is the waste that we create when we have this food. And that is going to be the topic of the discussion today. Uh, You can also be joining this session on Facebook Live. The format of the discussion is that we will kickstart with a few questions, which will be followed after the introduction of the whole panel. And once that is done, of course, during the course of this discussion, we encourage you to ask as many questions as you want. You can ask your questions in Facebook Live as well as through the Zoom Q&A tab, and we'll be addressing this question with our panel uh, at the end of the discussion. So please do ask questions because that's the idea of the Kampung Chats. And the idea of the Kampung Chats was basically that we want to increase awareness on issues that exist around sustainability in Singapore, and to tell you and to get experts onto the table to tell you about what is really happening versus what you sometimes might read or get educated by. So we want to fill that gap in knowledge that exists, and that's why we started Kampung Chats. So I'll give you a quick brief about who the Green Collective is. So if you don't know about us, we are a collective of sustainable brands in Singapore. What that means is that we basically work in a cooperative model wherein over 40 brands, 40 local sustainable brands are actually coming under one umbrella through which we do retail and other services that are provided to them. Sustainability is at the core of our business, and how we define it is that every brand that exists, who we like to call green khakis. So every khaki basically is aligned to one SDG goal and target when they enter into the Green Collective. And we have a huge focus on how do we measure the impact of what you are going to be purchasing tomorrow. And that is how we curate. But the main purpose of why we wanted to set up the Green Collective was to enable small social enterprises who are doing great work. But the biggest struggle was the first 1 to 2 years where you struggle to scale up. And what we wanted to create was an ecosystem through which you can get a retail presence, you can get data analytics, and you can basically have access to opportunities that you don't have. So that's what we've been doing in the last 2 years. We actually are present in Funan, which is where our offline store is. And of course, this whole event is around the Green Thinker, which is basically our e-commerce, which is getting launched in the last 2, 3 days. And that's what the Green Thinker looks like. The objective of the Green Thinker is to build a responsible kampung in the little red dot. The origination of the kampong idea comes from the fact that when we set up the Green Collective, we always had this area for discussion, which we call the kampong. And we found that as the heart and soul of the collective. We are not a retail shop. We are actually a collective. And the true sense of a collective is that if it can trigger conversations, if it can lead to thought leadership, and if it can lead to more people joining the movement. And that's what we've been doing. And that's what we want to further by now going digital. So for this period in which we're doing a launch, for all those of you who are attending, you can actually get a discount on the Green Collective website as well. I said this yesterday in the session, and I'll say that again through all the sessions that I will be moderating. Please don't buy things if you don't need them. The whole purpose of sustainability is not to increase consumption. The whole purpose of us to be there is to provide you an alternative to what you're consuming today, which may not be that sustainable. And that is our attempt, and that is our plea to you, that the best way to solve the sustainability problem is to reduce consumption and to buy what you absolutely need. So this is the schedule of the whole launch. There are different sessions that are going to be coming up, and you can stay tuned. You can actually, the session later at 12 p.m. today on holistic wellness, followed by a lot of our green kakis talking about their brands from 4 to 6:30 p.m. And we continue tomorrow in the same timing as well. So without further ado, I will now try to introduce the panel. We have some amazing entrepreneurs, corporate representatives, as well as Christopher from NEA as well over here. So we have a good, well-rounded panel in which we will be able to see the view from different sides on the ugly side of food. What I would do is at this moment, I will pass the screen, so to say, in a Zoom world to Christopher to tell us a bit more about your work at NEA and what are you responsible for. So we can do a round of introductions to the audience and then move into the questions. So Christopher, over to you.
Yeah, hi, Maya. Thanks very much for that opening. Yeah, and I'm Christopher from the National Environment Agency in the Waste and Resource Management Department. So in my role right now, I do planning and development and try to work with my colleagues over there to work towards the pushing towards a circular economy to move away from a take, make, dispose sort of economy, which has been a traditional linear economy in Singapore, towards one where we try to make as much use of our resources as much use as we can, trying to push for sustainable consumption, sustainable production, as well as sustainable waste resource management. I think as Mayu had mentioned earlier, yeah, food is one of the biggest issues that the National Environment Agency faces. It makes about 10% of the waste generated in Singapore. Very low recycling rate as well. Only 18% of it recycled. And food is also an existential problem for Singapore. I mean, we import a lot of food, and whatever is wasted is actually represents not just the cost of waste disposal, but also the cost of transporting it to Singapore, and also lost inputs.
Thanks a lot, Christopher. We'll be coming back to the various points you mentioned on circularity and stuff, and that's what we will not discuss. I'll throw the mic to Pam to tell us about Tree Dots and how you guys are actually looking to solve the food waste problem. Pam, over to you.
Hi, I'm Pamela from Tree Dots, and it was interesting that Christopher actually raised the point about food loss, which is exactly what Tree Dots does. So Tree Dots is a homegrown social enterprise that reduces food loss by redistributing unsold inventory from suppliers who can be our importers to businesses and households who could use them. So unsold inventories can actually arise from reasons like overstocking, where food has to be imported with minimum order quantities, and cosmetic filtering, where food is filtered off the supply chain for primarily size and shape reasons. So I'm part of the business development team and actually spearheading the B2C initiative, or rather the B2C channel at Tree Dots. Before this, Tree Dots only offered the supplies directly to businesses from suppliers with unsold inventory. But since we pioneered the B2C group buy initiative with collection points island-wide, we have been able to basically benefit households with the cost savings of the produce, but also for them to play their part to reduce food loss in Singapore. So that's what I do at 3 Dots.
Thanks, Pam. Actually, I was chatting with Nathan yesterday about how I met 3 Dots at Scape around 2 years back with one of your founders there. And I'm glad to see that you guys are actually doing a B2C thing, because I loved the idea then, I love the idea now, because it actually solves the problem at scale, which is sometimes an issue. So thanks for introducing yourself. Let me move to another social entrepreneur who's doing something very exciting as well. Travin, let me pass the screen to you to tell us about what Crust is all about.
Hi, okay, so my name is Trevin. I'm the founder and CEO of Crust. I guess I'm the baby of the group because we just recently entered the market. We are not very old actually. We have only been in the market since September. So as a company, right, what we do is for our vision is to maximize resources. And then our mission is actually to help reduce 1% of global food waste by 2030. So it is slightly bigger than the Singapore 30 by 30 goal. And yeah, we don't just focus in Singapore. We're actually moving to, we're entering Japan and Thailand soon as well. So what we focus on is, so as Christopher mentioned earlier, 18%, only about 18% of food are recycled in Singapore. And most of the recycle is actually towards the compost, animal feed, and bioenergy sector. So there's not so much of a recycling being done, right, for consumer perspective. So like we came in with a brand, right, focusing a lot more on consumer goods, so that we could use our brand as an education platform as well, whereby we bring in a product that is not very difficult to understand. Like beer was our very first product, but we're not stopping at beer. We're actually going to bring in like carbonated drinks and, like pancake mix and fly as well. All these will be used we actually incorporate surplus ingredients into all these different products that we actually make. So yeah, so it's just a consumer driven product, right? So that we could help bigger corporates minimize their own food wastage, using our platform. Whereas, the consumer perspective is just to educate people.
Thanks a lot, Travin, for that. I think it's really exciting to see the growth of Crust, and I'm personally also looking forward to that. I haven't tried it, so I need to try that first. So last but not the least, let me pass it over to Thomas. Thomas, please do give us a background about Alba, the role you guys have played internationally in Germany in specific, and then welcome to Singapore.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm representing Alba WH. We are the public waste collector in the Jurong sector, so in the west. And yeah, so basically our crews are basically seeing every day really the ugly waste of foods, because we are handling all the food waste and get it to the incineration plants at the moment. A little bit of background about who we are. We are actually two family-owned companies, Alba from Germany and Wantua from Singapore, which joined forces to somehow get the best of both worlds and come to Singapore to introduce new technologies and introduce more recycling concepts and modernize the industry. And thanks to NEA, we are now have the chance to prove our first concepts in Jurong. Yeah, and we are always looking for ways to help to increase recycling rates, or also to reduce waste generation in the first place as well. So I'm very happy. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to that discussion.
Thanks a lot, Thomas. And I think with that, let's just open the floor to questions and discussions as well. Guys, everyone in attendance, please feel free to ask your questions during the session. We will definitely address it at the later part. Christopher, I'll start I like to start the session with you, because I think like how we were just chatting before the session started, sometimes people don't understand entirely how big the problem is, as well as in a Singaporean context, how this problem and the way it's tackled today, there are efficiencies. Of course, there is areas of improvement, but there are efficiencies which are already built in. So could you just give our audience a brief of how is food waste treated today in Singapore?
Okay, thanks, Maya. Yeah, so food waste, as I mentioned just now, is a big problem. There are about 144,000 tons of waste generated in 2019. So that's the equivalent of about more than 50,000 double-decker buses. So if you think about that amount of food waste in Singapore, that is a huge amount. And I think that Trevin went into a bit of how it's treated just now. A lot of the food waste that is recycled is sort of animal is the agricultural or compost type of recycling. Most of our food waste right now is actually sent to the incineration plants or waste where it's converted to energy. So that's a way of treating it to extract some resources out of it. You get some energy out of the food, but it's not ideal because food waste tends to have a higher moisture content than some other sorts of waste. So as a result of that, you actually spend more energy to extract that, to incinerate the food, and thus you can extract less energy out of it eventually for exporting into the grid and contributing to Singapore's electricity supply. So as a result, we are trying to, in the NEA, trying to look at how we can do more for the treatment and recycling of food waste. I mean, right now, I think one thing that I've seen in the past few years, which I'm really thankful for, is an upswell in the number of on-site food waste digesters in Singapore. So these take food waste and convert it into, they digest the food waste over time, I think about over a day or so, and then it turns the food waste into fertilizer. And there is some effluent that is extracted from the food waste, and then that can be discharged. But you see, there is a good product in the sense that it can be turned into fertilizer. So those are on-site digesters. Another form of food waste recycling, which has come up more in recent years, other than the ones which Trevin had mentioned earlier, would be we do have a pilot of an food waste digester, which is where food waste is digested together with sewage sludge. This is taking place by the company Energia at Ulu Pandan reclamation plant, at Ulu Pandan Water Reclamation Plant. And so over there is co-digested with sewage sludge to produce biogas. So you can see actually there are some good products that can be extracted out of food waste at the recycling point. However, the thing is that even so, this is a step up from incineration. However, there are better ways to do it. And I am thankful for Crust. I have tried the beer there. It's pretty good. So I would to do more of that. The Kayato Stout, unfortunately, is out of stock. So
just a small update. We're actually bringing it back in about a month and a half.
Oh, great to hear.
Yeah.
yeah. You see, so you see that is one way of trying to valorize food waste, right? Something that we're trying to do more of recently, trying to encourage companies to do it. So the food waste valorization, you can turn waste food. Unfortunately, homogeneous food waste is something that is easier to valorize. You can turn food waste into a new product that can be eaten. Food to food. There's also food to feed, sort of waste of food waste valorization. Yeah, and I think that's something that we are looking forward to more coming years, and we will try to extract value from food in those ways.
Thanks, Christopher. Thanks a lot for that. I think I wanted to ask you that question just to give the audience an overall view of where we are with food waste. And I think I'll ask Thomas to unmute himself. And Thomas, you've seen two different countries and two different systems from Alba's perspective.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you see are different, or what do you see? I mean, how Singapore's progressed, or food habits are, of course, very different. The way the food waste must be generated must be different. So can you just give us kind of a contrast of two different regions in the world and how the food waste is handled?
Sure. Actually, it is in Germany also, food waste is one of the last thing that was tackled. And maybe one thing you just introduced is you have to start from the food culture, which is very different between Europe and Germany. Yeah. So Europe and Asia. So where I come from, the typical meal is you get one piece of meat one potato, a little bit of gravy, and one green. So, and then that's one plate. Whereas in Asia, you have this unbelievable, beautiful variety. And when you go to a Chinese dinner, you have 10, 12, 14 different dishes, which is really mind-blowing for European. But that also means usually just from a production perspective, that additional effort in the cuisine is also starting from the cooking process, producing more food waste. Yeah. Actually, we do run a food waste collection scheme in Berlin, and we also see ones in Berlin running Asian cuisines having more food waste, just because of the culture of how the food is produced. Coming that in Germany now, all the organic waste is also identified similar like in Singapore as the main development feature, the main thing where we increase recycling rates, and the upcoming legislation is going towards high energy utilization of food waste. So that means technically you have to produce biogas out of that, and then either use it as gas into the grid, or use it as energy, or use it as fuel. But then also there, we have a similar issue in terms of what to do with the rest after the biogas production, where you basically have the digestate, which would then also go on composting. But even a big country like Germany, running a lot of agriculture in the country, now has a problem to get rid of that composting. And then there's now a limit of how much you could use on fertilizing agriculture. So that into the Singaporean context on a large scale would mean it's not worthwhile to copy that entire concept, because here in Singapore there's even less agricultural production. And that's why the system which is about to come up in Singapore with the integrated waste management facility that Christopher talked about, where you basically have a co-fermentation with sludge and use that then afterwards, not as a compost, but in the sludge incineration process, is a tailor-made solution on a large scale for Singapore. So on that end, I would say that it's not wise to copy. Yeah? It is really, you would have to go into the local situation and the local requirements. Yeah, and that is, I think, what NEA did with the first step, with the integrated waste management facility. What we could now ask with, in light of COVID, whether we can somehow revitalize the whole composting or food-to-food idea, but in a Singaporean context, in terms of not producing just mass compost for industrial agriculture, but maybe producing specialized fertilizers out of food for upcoming urban gardening, vertical farming processes. Because I think then we can basically kind of close the loop with another initiative, which just recently came up, which is by 2030 to produce 30% of the food locally. And if you have all that fertilizer requirement for that 30% local production somehow generated out of the food waste already in country, that would be a perfect closed loop. I think that is where the development should go in the next years. And yeah, I think where we can all work together to make that happen.
Thanks a lot for that, Thomas. I think that was quite enlightening, and I think we'll come back to the circular discussion in a bit. And I want to deep dive and put this through this question to Pam and Pravin as entrepreneurs and as people building small social enterprises and tackling a problem which exists at a national level, and we all know that. What were some of the biggest challenges, and what are some of the things that you see structurally are very different to solve? And what were some of the challenges that you faced? Whoever wants to take it first.
Does Sherwin want to go first?
Okay.
Fresh in your mind.
Okay, so when I started, right, I actually started a company by myself, so I was running stuff by myself. It wasn't easy. I actually approached about 20 plus bakeries, with the idea, of a bread beer. Just come in as a partner. You don't have to do anything. Just give me your waste because I know you have tons. And I got like 20 plus no's. So every single one of them said no. And just the very disheartening part was that every single one of those companies were the local ones. Not so much in terms of the foreign one. I made it a point to approach local bakeries because I wanted to help the locals first. But then I got the most no's from the locals. So, as much as we are well ahead of most Asian countries in terms of a lot of aspects, right? But in terms of the sustainability side of things, I would bow it down to education of people just not knowing enough. Because right now, a lot of the food waste that is the work that's being done on food waste is a lot of background work. So a lot of things that locals will not be able to see. The older generation won't be able to see. So yeah, so that was that. I finally got my very first yes. I think after like 20 plus different calls, right? And it was from Maison Kaiser, Singapore, which is not even a local bakery. Yeah. Then only after, yeah. So it was still quite difficult. But then only after like we have been in the market for about a couple of months, people knew that okay, maybe this is an idea that is valid. That is valid, right? Then we started getting approached by a lot of other like local ones and stuff. So it's just, yeah, and that's exactly what we actually wanted to do. Using the brand as an educating platform as well. So it's a product that you can easily consume. You can have fun with it as well. By the same time, you're learning something. So that was the idea behind what we wanted to create at Crust, pretty much.
That's pretty cool. And Chavan, one quick question which came to my mind is, what was the issue that a lot of local bakeries were citing? Like, was it like, don't talk to me kind of a thing? Or was there something deeper than that you found out?
No, it was just very dismissive. That's pretty much it. Because it's a very new idea, they have no reference to what I was going to try and build. Okay, like it's something new. I'm not even sure if it's going to work. I'm not sure how far this can go, right? So never mind. On to the next one. Yeah. So it was something like that.
Definitely, I can understand as an entrepreneur. I completely sympathize with you as well.
Yeah. So it actually took me, I think, 2.5 months of just going down and giving emails, calling. I was very persistent. Going down, emails, calls, and then 2.5 months later, I finally got my yes.
Cool, thanks. I'll move to Pam now. Pam, I know you wanted to be the last one. So, but tell us about Three Dots journey, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the journey started with kind of moving to aggregators and reducing the food lots at an aggregator level, and now B2C. So it sounds really, really exciting. Just tell us, but also tell us some of the challenges and the hurdles that you face.
Okay, perhaps I can share on behalf of the co-founders on the founding journey. So when the three co-founders founded Three Dots, they basically saw a gap in the supply chain of food. They saw that there was a large proportion of food loss that was arising from reasons like overstocking and cosmetic filtering, which are reasons that actually doesn't discriminate food for what it tastes like or for its edibility, but really for reasons that is in oversupply or in surplus when you import it. You just can't clear it in the market in time. And also for reasons like aesthetics, right? Because it's either the size is too big or too small for retail packaging, or the shape is a bit odd for retail packaging. So I think at the start, when they actually reach out to suppliers to actually get supplies in the first place, suppliers were also a bit skeptical. They were like, what are you trying to do? And of course you have to convince them, right? And we actually have to be creative in kind of like finding, or rather identifying portions of food loss that they may have otherwise overlooked. Because these suppliers, they have already done business for so many years. We have only just been in the scene for maybe 2 to 3 years now. So for the past tens and decades, right, they have basically been producing food this way, in a sense that what gets cleared in the market gets cleared, what we see in the supermarket gets bought. but what doesn't get bought actually gets costed in those that we get to sell. So what is actually being thrown away is actually food that is perfectly edible. It's just that it's overstocked, it's in surplus, or it's being cosmetically filtered. So I think suppliers will also kind of like, they themselves may not be aware of reasons of food loss or sources of food loss, because to them it's just that this food cannot be sold, I'm going to throw it away. For example, in the sense of bread crust, nobody's going to buy it, I'm going to throw it away. So exactly this, right? They thought that they cannot clear this in the market, I'm just going to throw it away, I'm going to cost it in what I can actually sell. So Three Dots basically came in, talked to suppliers, identify sources of potential food loss, food that was not moving fast enough, and we actually get them to actually clear in the market at clearance pricing. So that's kind of like what we pitch ourselves to be, an online marketplace that actually clears food loss, potential food loss at clearance pricing to businesses. So our first, I think at the start, the founders actually had this initiative called like the Ugly Box, whereby they actually boxed up like vegetables, ugly vegetables and produce, and put it into a box. And it was a subscription box, like a surprise box to households who subscribe to it. And you'll be surprised because like even when we branded it as such, there were they often got actually feedback that, for example, the unpredictability of what I'll actually get actually thrown people off the ugly food, the food box. And some people were like, the food is in an odd shape, which is exactly what it should be. But just that, you know, it's not in the perfect size or in the perfect shape that you get in supermarkets. So that project didn't actually take flight, and that was actually, and Three Dots actually started with B2C at the very first days. Then of course they quickly pivoted from that, and then we went on to B2B. So that was when we talk to businesses, it's very straightforward. As long as the cost savings is there, they understand that they will save so much money, and then immediately it's intuitive for them. And to us, being sustainable is not about buying expensive products or living a premium lifestyle. It's actually exactly about saving our resources with technology, or even simple solutions like food redistribution. And that actually gets to save a lot of resources, and saving resources should always bring about cost savings. So that was B2B. For businesses, it's very clear. Once you prove the cost savings to them, once you prove the business case, they are totally cool with it, and then they're on board. And that was how we really scaled up rapidly within the businesses. So we supply to not just wet markets, we also supply to hotels, caterers, restaurants, even hawkers, huge base of businesses. So then again, then we started a B2C channel. So how the B2C channel came about was basically we saw that, you know, our businesses were kind of on board. We knew how to scale on the business side of things. Many hawkers, restaurants were on board. But then there was always this kind of like gap in the sense that like we still had so much more supplies to clear. But we could not clear it all with the businesses that we already have, and we are continually acquiring. So that was when I was like, you know what, I think households can also benefit. And furthermore, businesses were benefiting from the cost savings. Why can't households benefit from the cost savings as well? You know, like you go to a supermarket, a piece of like chicken breast is like maybe $3, and it's like a few grams. You come to Three Dots, you get a bag of 5 kg for $24.80. So that's the kind of like bulk clearance pricing that we're actually getting these food loss products at. That I felt, or we felt, that actually we can redistribute these cost savings, we can redistribute this food back to consumers, because you are already paying for food loss when you go to the supermarket, right? Every dollar that you pay, part of it is used to cover the cost of food loss. But if you shop with us, we are giving you clearance pricing because the suppliers have already accounted for these costs. They just want to clear it to make back their costs and maybe earn a bit more for logistics. We play the logistics arm and the distribution channel, and then we bring about the efficiency in matching supply and demand. So with that, we also work with some we are also in talks with some government agencies to basically scale this on the consumer end. MSE is one, NEA is a few that we are talking to a few different departments. So we are just trying to see like how we can actually reach a larger footprint in Singapore, because I think especially after the COVID, right, where people are financially impacted, that's when we also feel that this has potential to really bring back what food should be. It shouldn't be exorbitant, it shouldn't be wasteful, and everyone really get to save both food and money especially even more during this difficult time, but especially during peacetime as well. We should kind of consider food has been very increasingly commodified. And I think that's what we're trying to bring back, right? So sometimes when we give people fresh chickens and it's bloody, and then they're like, why is it bloody? We're like, these are fresh chickens. Of course, there's blood. So we have become disconnected. Food has become commodified. And that is also one of the reasons of food loss as well.
Thanks a lot, Pam. And I'm personally quite happy to hear about Three Dots' journey, because it's been some time and it's been a lot of hard work. I know that. But that's great to see. I will turn this back to Christopher. And Christopher, I think you were at the panel yesterday, and what we started talking about when Esther was talking about circularity and bringing in circular systems more and more to Singapore. Like Pam, you just mentioned about COVID, and one of the things that we've seen, especially in Europe, is that a lot of European cities have opened back in a donut model, like Amsterdam, for example. There's a huge push to be circular overall. How much do you think is it feasible to begin with to have these circular systems? Because Thomas also talked about it. So just wanted to get some comments from you and how NEA is approaching it.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Maya. Yeah, so I must add that I think the first step towards circularity is to just avoid waste in the first place. And I think that is something which NEA has been trying to really put its focus on since about 5 years ago or so. I think so in order to avoid waste, I mean, such as solutions by Pamela's Three Dots initiative, I think Pamela and Nicholas' Three Dots initiative, that's something that we're very thankful for. See, these are initiatives that help to redistribute food from leftover food, which is unwanted, but which it actually is really still edible, right? So such food can be redistributed to other people who might buy them. There are also, say, NGOs such as Food Bank, which take leftover food and then redistribute it to needy people. So I think we are very thankful for these initiatives, which really help to reduce the food waste in the first place. On top of that, NEA actually has this food waste reduction handy guide. And so we try to encourage people as consumers to do their part to avoid food waste. I think we must bear in mind that, that out of household waste, and according to our studies, about half of that, half of household waste is food waste. So there is a lot of household waste that can be avoided if we just reduce the amount that we throw away. I mean, for instance, just taking leftovers and storing leftovers properly, not before eating it later. I mean, for example, fried rice is a good way of trying to reduce food waste. Food waste handy guide, there's other recipes that we can try to look at. Just buying enough, not buying more than you need. I mean, that's another great way to start to try to push for circularity. So, and in a way, you see, by doing this, we try to avoid in Singapore the need to import food. So the import of food is, in a way, trying to go outside the circular economy, right? It's inevitable because in Singapore, we are a small open economy, we are a city. I think that is something which we always have to remember, right? Singapore is a city, and in reality, there are a lot of other types of land users out there beyond the city. I mean, we are, I think as Pamela said, we are, in a way, when food is commoditized, we are somewhat far away from thinking about where food comes from agricultural industries. So I think it's something we constantly need to remember, that Singapore is a city, and so by trying to reduce the wastage, trying to reduce the amount that we bring in the first place, we are taking the first step towards circularity. So then the next step then is, say, how do we treat food waste, right? I mean, that is, we must also remember that not all food waste can be avoided. Things like chicken bones, can't avoid that. Say, fruit peel, like durian husk, mango husk, we can't avoid this. So we do have to try to find some way to treat it. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of more and more on-site food waste treatments by commercial establishments. I'm thankful for Alba as well for working as part of the Jurong tender to set up on-site food waste treatments in some hawker centers in Singapore. So I mean, in Singapore, I think as Maya mentioned somewhat at the start of this talk, that food is a very essential part of our lives. Hawker centers are very, very much part of our lives in Singapore. So having on-site treatment over there is a way to help. And on-site treatment does help to convert the food waste to something that can be used again in the economy. So there are other initiatives which are trying to push for circularity. But I think we also have to bear in mind that there are constraints in Singapore. So in Singapore, we are a tropical country, hot and humid. So food waste decomposes very quickly. So you see, we have to really think about, what happens to the food before we manage to convert it to a useful product. What happens to food waste before we convert it to a useful product? In the meantime, it can decompose, there might be odors, there might be pests. I think this was mentioned in the panel last night as well. There could be vectors. So these, the public health concerns are something that we can't run away from in Singapore. We are trying to push for more circularity, try to avoid food being thrown away. But I think what we need is really to try to ensure that there are solutions out there that can try to push us towards that. And at the same time, these solutions, I think as we go more over the years, there are more and more solutions coming up. Technology is getting cheaper. So I think we can look forward to more of that in the future.
Thanks a lot for that, Christopher. And I'll continue the thought process that you initiated on the consumer perception of having products related to food waste. And I'll ask Travel about this. Travel, what do people feel, or did you get some negative feedback initially about why are you giving me beer made out of waste?
Okay, so there's actually a difference between food loss and food waste. What we deal with is food loss, at least for the beer side of things. We don't touch food waste. So food waste is basically the one that you consume halfway, and when you're full, right, then you just throw it away. We don't touch that at all, because of SFA's regulations and all those stuff. I don't want to get I don't want to keep visiting NE and SFA all the time. So we only deal with food loss right now for the beer side of things. So it's basically like a system issue. Be it either it's a collective problem. Consumers, you have no idea when consumers will actually consume more or less. And then businesses won't be able to dictate that as well. So, like for example, an online grocer, right, with a packet of bread, right, if it's within its last 2 to 3 days of consume by date, they will either discard it or donate it. Why is that so? Is because from the time a consumer places an order to the time the grocer processes the order and then deliver it, consumers might only have about a day to then consume it, which is not viable in some instances, right? So that's where we come in and we find a solution for it in the beer sense. So that is, so that was something that when I first started out, I think 3 months after I entered the market, right, I started getting all these questions. So we went on social media to then clear things out, like we are not dealing with food waste, we're dealing with food loss. And then that was where, when people started understanding it better, right, then people were more receptive to the product. Yeah, so that was that. So then we started getting questions in a sense that, why aren't you working with fruits? Why aren't you working with all the peels, all the husks, and all this other stuff? And that was when, we started shifting and restructuring the company in such a way whereby we are not a brewing company anymore. We are actually an R&D platform. So right now we are working on product development using like your citrus peel, your pineapple husk, even your ugly fruits and your surplus fruits, right? And we are trying to convert it into like carbonated drinks, just so that we can show consumers that there are other alternatives to all this as well, stuff like that. So that's what we're looking at. And we don't just look at other people's waste. We also look at our own waste, because when I brew beer, I have my own production waste as well. I make grains, right? I need grains, I need hops and all those stuff. So we did a plant-based beer actually with Edible Garden City. So the idea behind that plant-based beer was that for the company to be able to reach our mission of reducing 1% of global food loss by 2030, it is not necessary that we only have to work with food loss, right? If I could find as many substitute to ingredients that we export, right, and make a very localized product, I can also indirectly reduce food loss by a lot. So that's the idea behind what we are doing as well. So yeah, we made the plant-based beer, right? The idea behind using that plant, it's called Ulam Raja. It's this very nice green mango notes to it, tropical notes, right? Was to find an alternative to hops. so that my beer line then will not be too dependent on hops. That means exporting product in. Because by the time you export a product in, right, you might only get maybe 80% of the yield, because of the transportation, it's not the most ideal. So that's what we're doing. So even grains and bread essentially has the same ingredients, right? So we started with replacing 30% of our grain bill, but then we started increasing slowly by 40 to 50%, hoping to achieve as much as possible so that in the future we will not be, we don't need grains anymore, and see what kind of other stuff that we can actually add into a beer. So that's just for the beer. We're also making carbonated drinks and our own production waste of spent grains that we have. We are currently in the product development phase of converting those into like flour or pancake mix. Yeah, so we are looking at the whole chain. And yeah, so it is a thought process, like to maximize our resources. We had an unfortunate incident at the brewery about 8 months ago, whereby we had, I think, about 200 bottles of flat beer. So there's only two things you can do to it. Either you throw it away, but it's at the expense of the environment, or you sell it, but it's at the expense of negative reviews from customer, right? So again, we just put it in the warehouse. Took about a week to utilize the same mindset, to maximize our resources, right? Did a bit more research, found out that flat beers are the perfect thing to actually distill into liquor. So then we actually reached out to a bar, right? Smoke and Mirrors actually, and then we started working on a distilled liquor, a small batch distilled liquor, and we're gonna launch it soon as well. So it's just that we always make sure we take that 5 minutes to look for a solution and not just take the easier way out of like just throwing something away.
Cool. That's really cool to know, actually, Travan. Thanks a lot for mentioning that, because those kind of anecdotes actually are what we need, is much more examples of in the whole sustainability community to look for solutions and not just keep saying the problem is, and change that whole line to the solution is. So
Correct.
we're getting a lot of questions, so I'll start moving to some of the questions. And Thomas, there are a bunch of questions directed for you. So I will start with that. Given that there are many questions, I might just combine them. So Thomas, there are two questions for you. One is focused on what are the ways that could help change the mindset of people to motivate them towards composting and recycling food waste. And I think that question has been posted twice. So that's been asked to you by the audience.
So basically what we see as our role as public waste collectors also to educate and basically enforce recycling and incentivize recycling. It helps us in two ways. First of all, it helps overall towards a zero waste nation, but in the end, it also helps us because if there's less waste produced and more recycled, that's also better for our operation. So what we came up with is a new app called Step Up Sustainability, where we basically, it has a couple of features. The core functionality is basically that we incentivize our customers, being the public, for recycling, and they can scan when they use the recycling bins, take a picture, and with that then they get CO2 points, which we present basically the amount of carbon emissions they saved with that action. So it's not just like a point currency for loyalty program. We make it in a way that it represents actually the carbon footprint you're actually doing as a positive action. It also shows you where all those recycling bins are. It has a tips section and a news section, and we are trying to get more and more partners on board, like you guys, to increase that outreach beyond just go to the recycling bin, but overall to a more sustainable lifestyle. And that is basically our way to contribute, to educate, besides all of the school programs we are running. It's available on Android and iPhone. It's available all over Singapore, whereas at the moment, the most people contributing are obviously the people in the West. And this is how we try to contribute on that end.
Thanks a lot, Thomas. And Pam, I'll throw this question to you as well. since you're focusing on a lot of B2B partnerships for Three Dots, what do you think can be done? What do you think we can ask the consumers to do more or do differently? And what are some of the steps that you guys are planning to take? You're on mute.
Sorry, thanks. I think for us, we have actually seen quite a bit of synergy between B2C and B2B. So at first, when we were supplying to B2B customers, right, they would actually not want to be, they don't want to be openly associated with food loss, mainly because they are afraid of consumer perception as well. But now that we have kind of proven with a huge base of consumers regularly purchasing from us and actually cooking for their families and enjoying the food that we provide, that has actually changed our perceptions in some businesses as well. And because of consumers supporting us and getting their supplies from us, we have actually enjoyed spillover effects such that new businesses are coming to us for us to supply them because they see like what a good job we've done, like kind of with the consumer side. So I think that's encouraging because it shows that as much as we want to achieve impact at scale, I think in the end, we still have to be able to make impact to the individual consumer such that he or she can influence others and influence the businesses that are more structural to also take heed about this. Yeah, so I think we kind of have this goal of like reaching this stage, right, whereby businesses will want to be like kind of endorsed by Three Dots, kind of like a Three Dots, not really certification, but more of like you're a Three Dots partner to show that your supplies are responsibly sourced from us. We are also looking at perhaps really branding the products that we provide as well to basically have the educational element with the households that actually purchase from us. So I think our very first base of households who purchase from us were actually those who joined our little group from the Journey to Zero Waste in Singapore Facebook group. Yeah, so it was really small pool of 10 people, and now we have grown to pretty strong, about more than 500 on a weekly basis. So it's been very encouraging because we have, I think altogether during circuit breaker, the 2 months alone, I think we saved close to 20K of food loss from not being consumed. And I think changing perception is something that we will keep working on. So definitely the educational piece, why each food that we offer actually ends up as a food loss item. For example, this week we had a cod fish promotion, but actually because these cod steaks were actually undersized. So usually people want to see like a big piece of steak. But what happens to those that actually end up smaller? Because fishes or chickens are like us, right? We don't grow up to be like a perfect size and shape. So like what happens to those that don't grow up to perfect size and shape? And I say this a lot about chickens because chickens in supermarkets, we have to get them in 1 kg bags. For example, 1 bag says 1 kg. If you get it at 999, customers are gonna like fine you and like complain the hell out of you. But because they're dealing with food loss items, right? So these are actually chickens who could be too small for 1 kg or maybe even too big for 1 kg. And these actually don't make it to retail, and this is actually the sources of food loss. So it's not just products that are too small or too undesirable per se, but it could also be because they are just too big. And that always surprises me. So I think perception and actually connecting people back to where food comes from, the resources that goes behind growing food, it has really been very commodified, which is why we are able to cost food loss in what we actually sell. But if you take into account the resources that went behind growing this food, it's actually not that cheap, right? You're not accounting for the water footprint, as well as the carbon footprint used to ship the food, and as well as the whole feedstock that goes behind rearing the food that we have. And to have such a huge amount of food loss, and to know that we have not even managed to clear most of it, that drives us a lot because we feel that there's a lot of perceptions to be changed, and we see that with each perception being changed, we actually gain a lot more ground in Singapore. And we do hope to be able to scale this up, not on a national level, working hopefully with government agencies and with partners on the panel together on how we can basically achieve a greater impact and especially to change perceptions together. Because I think all this has spillover effects. When people get more mindful about food and the footprint of food, they also get more mindful about the footprint of every other action that they take. For example, like Thomas' story about recycling really speaks to me because like my own journey started when I went to Germany for exchange. So I understand what he's talking about, right? The recycling system in Germany, the technology in Europe, even the renewable energy targets in Europe. And that is always something that we are driving ourselves towards. And I think it all starts with changing perceptions and as well as finding partners that we can scale this change of perception with. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, man. Thanks a lot. I think that was very interesting what you talked about, the perception of how much footprint is there in the food which comes on the table. And it's very different. And in the sustainability word, perception is always said about people change perception first about what they put in their bodies. Then the next one is what they put on their bodies, which is mostly wellness. And the third is fashion, which is where fashion becomes one of the biggest polluters as well. And we don't see that. So you can't really visualize it. And I think in the case of Singapore, that's definitely a big problem. But problems will always exist. And that's, I love the fact that you said that we all have to work together and kind of solve it. I'll move on to Christopher because Christopher, there's a lot of questions for NEA. I will try to summarize some of them in order to convert them into some heads because we have around 5 minutes more left. So, Christopher, there are questions related to statistics. I will prioritize questions which are more on solutions. So there are questions around composting facilities to be provided for as community composting facilities and which could be used for community gardens. Is that a feasibility? Regarding composting and the loss of food waste at a household level, again, there are two more questions. One is how big is food waste? How big is this component, the household food waste as compared to overall food waste? And are there other alternatives as well? Some of the alternatives suggested is giving innovative innovative recipes should reduce food waste. So I think it's a multifaceted question, but maybe let's start with the community garden part.
Okay, thanks, Maya. Yeah, on the community garden issue and composting, I mean, I must say that we have to be quite careful about really composting on a very large scale all around Singapore. I did talk about potential odor issues and pest issues. So we have to when composting, I think we have to be very careful that composting is done properly, is done well, in a way that does not attract pests for housing estates. See, because I think we have to remember that in Singapore, we are a very dense city, right? So say even if, you must always remember that there are people who are involved in the community gardens, but at the same time, and who maybe will benefit from that. So if there are any costs associated with odor, if there are problems associated with vectors or pests, the people who do the composting will be affected, but everyone else will be affected as well. I think that's something we have to remember. And so would we have widespread composting everywhere in Singapore? I mean, it's really hard to say. I know there are some community gardens out there that have started some composting, but I think we have to try to take that in a very measured way. And I think that if the people in charge of the community garden are willing to do it well, are willing to take care of the compost heap, I think it can be done. But there are many different standards of many varying levels about how community gardening is done in Singapore. As to composting at home, I think the National Parks Board has a DIY composting page. They have a website on that, so you can try to take a look at that. I think that might be useful. So as for statistics about how much food is compared to food waste in Singapore is compared to the overall food waste, I apologize that I don't have that at hand. But I think the important thing is that, especially in this circuit breaker period, we are seeing a lot more consumption of food happening at home. We are seeing more food delivery, more work from home arrangements going on. I mean, of course, there is a very huge army of essential workers who are out there, who are doing work, very good work to fight this battle against COVID and who are managing to keep our city running. I think that we cannot forget. But there is also a larger proportion of people who are working from home. So we are getting more food waste being generated from home. And so I would try to bring this back to the point I made earlier about just remembering there are many ways to reduce food wastage. And by reducing food wastage, we can reduce the amount that we spend on food. You see, food wastage are lost inputs. And we also can reduce the amount that we spend on imports. Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher. I think I'll just take one last question or try to combine 2, 3 again. One is on any release of statistics. Can the frequency be changed from yearly or half yearly? Can it be changed from yearly to making it quarterly or half yearly, or what are some of the challenges with that? That's one. The second one is about is biogas produced from food waste considered as a sustainable energy alternative? Do you want to go in certain order, or?
Okay, perhaps I'll take a crack at the statistics one first. I think we must always try to remember that there's a cost for statistics, and then so I mean I guess I can't say never. I think it's not something that is being looked into right now. I think it's something that we can take back, maybe to just try to see what can be done. But there is a cost to generating statistics. I mean, there is a cost to, the cost can come in the form of, say, trying to measure all the inputs accurately. And I think we have to always remember that when we release official statistics from the NEA, they are considered official, right? So I mean, we have to be quite careful about the accuracy of them and the veracity of them when we do release these statistics. So I do seek the understanding of the people who asked the question. As for the second question, sorry, could you just
Christopher, that is biogas produced from food waste considered as a sustainable energy?
So is biogas considered sustainable energy? I would say that yes. I mean, in the sense that the biogas is produced from a biogenic source, right, of food, of waste. And the other point is that when biogas is produced and it's used to power a particular system, you do forego the need to use gas or some other fuel in its case. So that does help. So biogas is produced by an anaerobic digestion. So there is that Ulu Pandan Water Reclamation Plant project, where co-digestion, which I mentioned earlier, where there's a co-digestion of sewage sludge as well as food waste. And I think that is a form of how we are trying to make use of biogas. Another form would be that which Thomas, thanks very much for that shout out earlier about the integrated waste management facility. I think there will still be a few years before that comes up. But when it does come up, we are looking at co-digestion of food waste as well as sewage sludge, which would also be something that can produce biogas for use and in a way try to use the product from the food waste. Yeah, so I think as time goes on, could we explore more uses of anaerobic digestion and biogas? Maybe, yes. I think we have to, we can try to do more of that.
That's really interesting. Thanks a lot for that, Christopher. And we've gone slightly over time, and I'm conscious of the next session as well. So I ideally wanted to do a roundup and get everyone comments, but I think we've run slightly out of time. But I'm happy that we could answer all the questions in this session. So I'll just wrap up this session for the audience by telling them what's next. So in another 30 minutes, we'll be starting with a session on holistic wellness. So like we said, sustainability is first about what we put inside our body, which is why we talked about the ugly side of food first. And then the next session should be about what we put on our body. So Mathilde from Orgayana will be moderating this session. So do join us if you're free. And of course, coming to food waste, that's something that Alva and us, Thomas and us, we've been working pretty closely on it. And we started tackling the food waste issue as the Green Collective as the COVID came in. And we kind of converted similar to what Travin and Pam did, we tried to convert that into an opportunity by coming up with a solution for home composting. So you can go to the Green Thinker, the e-commerce website, and actually one product that we have is basically a home composter, which basically does bokashi composting. And you can try it out. We also have a Facebook community where we do active engagement on how to deal with the composter, because that's something we realized. And to answer some of the questions that you guys mentioned about how do you change consumer behavior, because actually that's what we are all on this call striving to do. We will need to change consumer behavior and make it convenient to people as much as we can. So do check it out so that you can start your journey. There's always a start, and that's what I would say. So with that, I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for taking time out. Christopher, Thomas, Tavin, Pamela, thanks a lot for coming together for this session to answer a lot of questions from a holistic way and in a Singaporean context, which I think are two pieces of the puzzle which need to be always talked about when we talk about any waste solution and in specific food waste. So thanks a lot for taking time out. Thanks to all the attendees for attending this, and hope we've answered a lot of your questions that you guys had. So thank you and have a good day, guys. Thanks
Thanks
a
for
lot.
organizing. Bye
Thank you.
bye.